So, you've recently started your postgraduate research degree, and one of the most common ways to begin that process is by starting to write your literature review. Now, you might have written a literature review before as part of your undergraduate project or a master's dissertation, but at this stage, it's both a bigger bit of work, but also a considerable step up in terms of your development as an independent researcher. So let's review what the role of the literature review is, both as a document in your final thesis, but also it's the part that it plays in your development as a researcher. And that role will evolve and change over time. So let's have a look at what its job is now and also what it will become in later stages of your degree. So in year one, to begin with, the literature review helps you to build your own knowledge and understanding of the topic that you've chosen to study. Now, you might have studied it before to some extent at undergraduate or master's level, but at this point, you're starting to become an expert on that topic. So, a thorough review of the literature really helps you to build your knowledge and understanding in depth and start to feel that you actually know what you're talking about. And it doesn't end there, of course. The literature review also helps you map the literature and get a sense of what work has already been done. Who are the key figures? What are the seminal research papers? What are the current trends and issues? What are the debates and schools of thought? Which are the more firmly established research areas and which are the more cutting edge, promising new avenues of thought? And hopefully your own PhD will be one of those. You're synthesizing all of those individual books and articles into an account of the current state of knowledge as you see it. You're also starting to organise that summary into themes that are relevant for your work. So it's your map, it's your account, and you're bringing together the research in a way that makes sense for you and makes sense for your research project. There isn't an official list of the literature that you need to review out there. Okay, if you do miss a really key piece of research, that might be a problem, but it's your supervisor's role in these early stages to make sure that you don't. If you overlook a minor journal article that's only vaguely relevant to your project, that's not going to be quite so much of a problem. So being thorough doesn't mean reading and including everything that could be relevant. You're still being selective. You're using your own judgment. It's really important to set limits, to define your terms, to establish the boundaries of what you're looking at and what you're not looking at, and set your own clear criteria for what's relevant and what isn't to you. Otherwise, you're going to be reading forever, and your literature review will be huge and shapeless and directionless, and it won't help you or your reader. So the map that you're creating of the literature helps you to lay out the borders and boundaries of the topic that you're working on. So it's okay to leave things out. A literature review is more than just a catalogue of existing knowledge, though. It's more than I read this and it said that. You'll also be thinking about its use to you, getting a sense of what knowledge will become the foundations that you're building your own research on, the building blocks that you'll be using to create your own work. You're not reinventing wheels or starting from scratch. You are extending what's already there. So included in your literature review is not just looking at what other research found, but also how they went about it, how other researchers framed and approached similar problems. So basically, what methodologies, what concepts, what approaches, what theoretical frameworks are there out there that you could be using and adapting as tools for your own research? And to ensure that the research that you're building on is a solid foundation rather than a weak spot which undermines all of your own research, and to make sure that the methodological tools that you're choosing are appropriate for your own work, then you need to start critiquing that literature to test how solid a foundation you're building on, how high quality are the building blocks and the tools that you're using later on. So at this fairly early stage, you're not just reading for information, you're reading with a really critical mindset. And it is really hard at first, coming to a critical judgment about research when you feel that you're a newcomer to the field and still a student after all. But all of it's helping you build that critical independence and learning from perhaps the mistakes of others or the good approaches of others so that you can start to build that into your own approach to your work. It's also important to remember that that kind of judgment is something that you develop over time. Your stance will evolve as you grow in expertise and in confidence, and that's perfectly natural. It's also a very good reason not to treat this document that you're writing in the first year as the final finished document. 3 years later, you might come back to it and see it completely differently because you've learned so much more since then. And also, unlike undergraduate or master's level work, a thesis for a PhD or a research degree needs to make an original contribution to the research. It doesn't mean that it has to be completely paradigm shifting and innovative and novel. It might be a slight adjustment or refinement or an extension to what we know, maybe coming at it from a different angle or focusing on a slightly different aspect of it. But you do need to justify that your research needs to be done, that it's contributing something meaningful to the state of knowledge. So what you're doing is you're outlining the research gap. You're looking at the vacant niche that your work is going to occupy, and you're critically appraising your own rationale for why it's needed and how it contributes. So you're critically appraising literature. You're not just looking at what's there and how good it is. You're also looking at what's not there, what's needed, what could have been done better, and the opportunities that that presents for you. So it's helping you go back and refine and adjust your initial proposal. So during your first year of the thesis, your literature review is as much a process as a document, helping you develop that knowledge and understanding, helping you develop that expert familiarity with the field, but also that ability to think critically and creatively about how research is done, to develop your own critical judgment and build your own agenda as an independent researcher. The initial draft of that literature review is a means for your supervisor to help you and to offer feedback and guidance on that process. But it's important to remember that the literature review is an evolving thing, and what you write in your first year is very much a working document. It's not the final product. Research doesn't stand still for the 3 years or so of your thesis. New papers and new books will be published. They might help you to build your case even more strongly. They might help you out of a pitfall that you've got stuck in. They might suggest an interesting new angle that you hadn't thought of that you could bring in at a later stage. Or they might threaten that research gap, that niche that you occupied and identified as being yours. The thing that you're researching might change too. The world changes as you're researching it. So the basis of scholarship, the literature that you need to draw on, might start to shift as well. And you'll change too. You'll change your own thinking and your own opinion as you learn more and as you become more independent as a researcher. So you might need to reevaluate your view of some of the things that you read in your first year and change your mind. So it's important to stay up to date and keep the literature review updated as well, to respond to new developments or to reevaluate old developments in the light of your new understanding. So don't leave your literature review behind once you move on from your first year. So let's look at the middle year of your PhD then. That early focus on other people's work has started to shift into a focus on presenting your own research, but your literature review still has a job to do. It starts to take on a new function. Rather than developing you, it started to become a toolbox of references that you can draw on for later chapters. Whether you're simply wanting to back up a fact, whether you're providing your theoretical framework as you interpret and analyse your data or your sources, whether you're showing the significance of your conclusions in the final chapters of your thesis and showing how novel and interesting they are. If you're doing empirical science, these citations will probably appear again in your methods section or your discussion section. If you're working more in arts and humanities, then you'll probably be touching again on the work that you do in your lit review in your introduction and also throughout in every single chapter in your thesis. So the literature review is probably the most heavily referenced part of your final thesis, but other parts of the document will draw on and use the lit review as a bank of citations. If you're starting to lose focus with your literature review and you don't know where to stop reading, then it might become clearer at that middle stage. Ask yourself, how am I going to use the research that I'm reviewing in my own work? How is it helping me with what I'm trying to do in the later chapters? If it's not useful for some purpose or other later on, then perhaps you don't need to include it. Or maybe if you're hunting around for a reference in a later chapter, you might realise that actually there's an area of the literature that you need to go back to and review in that initial lit review chapter. Your middle year then is probably a good point to return to your literature review, refocus it, trim it and adjust it a little bit so it's still running in parallel to help inform the other chapters that you're writing as you go. In your final year though, when you're working on that thesis, that document that you're going to submit, the literature review starts to take on a role much less for you or for your supervisor, but for your ultimate reader, whether that's your examiner or whether it's a future researcher who wants to build on your findings in turn. It's not just a survey of the literature, it is actually part of your argument. So your voice and your stance need to be absolutely at the forefront of your writing there. Even though you're writing about other people's work, the reader still needs to know, what do you think about it? Why did you include it? What is it useful for? Where is it flawed? Where is it missing in relation to your own research agenda? So the literature review in that final document is there to establish your authority and expertise, reassuring your reader that you've read everything that you need to read, that you know what you're talking about, that you're able to make informed decisions that they can trust about how to go about doing research, and that you're familiar with, that you're part of that research community and those research conversations that you're reporting back on, that you know how to create and justify your own research agenda independently. So that literature review in that final document, it might look quite different to that early review that you're working on at the moment. It all helps create that impression of the expert who knows what they're doing. And after all, once you get the PhD, that's what you're going to be. But that isn't the document that you're writing now at the beginning of the process. So don't worry if you feel that you aren't that confident, authoritative expert just yet. Your literature review is actually part of the process of getting you there.